Ever since the lows of the pandemic, supply chains around the world have been tossed around, which has been one of the major reasons for price increases of thousands of various goods and even some services. This inflation has focused the Fed at planning to raise interest rates multiple times this year in order to curb rising costs. Inflation acts as a tax on consumers as it decreases the purchasing power of income and reduces the value of fixed income assets such as savings in a bank account. Fears of higher interest rates have already sent investors fleeing from high multiple stocks, which in turn has led to a massive decline in anything that isn't yet making money today, regardless of its growth rate. On top of this, however, the war between Russia and Ukraine has spiked oil prices as countries attempt to ban imports of Russian oil, and at the same time speculators pile into pushing the price of the commodity even higher. Between February 25th and March 4th, the price of oil jumped from $91 per barrel to $115. That's a 26% increase within 1 week in a global commodity that most countries in the world rely heavily on for energy. This and the continued sanctioning of Russia has spurred Elon Musk to tweeting, "Hate to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures." Now this seems counterintuitive coming from Elon Musk. Here we have the biggest proponent of the environment, who works tirelessly on electric vehicles and sustainable energy, saying that it's critical to start boosting drilling and oil output right away. Now the reason he says this is that if Russia goes offline, in terms of being able to purchase crude oil from the country, then this will cause a major shortfall of energy sources not only for the US, but for the world as well. The US only imports a small portion of its crude oil from Russia, about 3%. However, according to the EIA, the United States imports a much larger percentage of petroleum products from Russia, which includes crude oil, but also refined products as well, such as gasoline. Russia is actually the second largest producer and exporter of petroleum in the world, and they're not part of OPEC. About 11% of the oil exported in the world comes from Russia. Now, the price of oil is actually extremely sensitive to relatively small changes in production and demand. For instance, during the pandemic, we witnessed oil prices literally go negative as businesses were shut down and the working from home theme began. One would think that the consumer demand would have also dropped to virtually zero in order to get oil prices to go negative, but in fact, demand dropped from about 100 million barrels per day to 85 million, only an approximate 15% drop, which caused oil to go to zero and then even further down. At the present time, the opposite is occurring, where if Russia can no longer export its products, about 10% of oil may be at risk, and we're already seeing $115 oil, which is actually still not at its 2007 highs of around $150 per barrel. High oil prices could cause the Fed to raise interest rates more quickly, or could on its own slow down business due to drastically increased prices, which may lead to a recession, something that Elon Musk has predicted earlier this year that could occur. But that said, as we saw during the 2008 recession, which is quite painful for the economy, jobs, and low-income earners, it could lead to a reversal in the price of crude oil, which may put a damper on inflation. Throwing the economy into recession may occur in order to try and stop raging inflation. The Fed has a difficult job of trying to balance interest rates to keep inflation under control, as well as continue to keep the economy growing at a reasonable pace. At the same time, using the pandemic playbook of encouraging people to work from home if possible and to drive less could target oil prices specifically, which would also help to curb inflation. And by the way, stop using Yahoo Finance, stop using Google Finance, and have a look at our website, themarketisopen.com, where we have instant stock quotes and financial data going back 10 years, and it's all freely available. Now, currently, with a deficit of oil production driving up prices, the US basically needs to try and fill the gap for itself and also try to help the rest of the world by exporting its oil. However, Elon Musk's comment about increasing production seems obvious to any US oil company, so why would he tweet this? The US oil companies play along with the free markets, unlike OPEC, which basically can control the price of oil by increasing or decreasing production. For instance, as Russian oil exports are being banned, OPEC doesn't want to increase their production because if they keep things the same, the price of oil skyrockets as we've seen, and they'll make considerably more money without having to do anything extra. However, the North American oil industry is made up of many small companies that basically make their own decisions in terms of oil production based on market factors. When oil prices crash, they start to shut down their least profitable oil rigs first. For example, in some areas of North America, if oil drops below $60 a barrel, it no longer makes sense to produce it at that price, so they turn off the oil rigs. But when oil prices rocket higher, these more expensive locations where oil is produced suddenly become quite profitable, and it makes a lot of sense to turn them back on and to boost production into rising prices. And so the industry manages itself this way, but Elon Musk doesn't really need to tell the industry to produce more. They already know how to do that. However, I think the importance of this tweet resides in the fact that it is coming from Elon Musk, one of the biggest forces against the fossil fuel industry. And so he's not only giving the go-ahead that he agrees and he's pushing for increased domestic production, but because he also has millions of followers, many of which are completely against fossil fuels and will do everything they can to stop them, he's in a sense telling them that this is in fact needed and trying to remove the barriers for the oil and gas industry, as this is indeed a critical time for the country and the world. About 66% of U.S. petroleum is used for transportation according to the EIA in 2020, with 28% being used for industrials, including plastics, polyurethane, solvents, and hundreds of other intermediate and end-user goods. Even if all the transportation was replaced with electric vehicles, it would certainly make a dent in the price of oil, but the U.S. would still be using millions of barrels of oil per day for plastics and industrial applications. At the same time, we've seen strong environmental opposition to pipelines between Canada and the United States, for instance, with projects being cancelled, meaning that the U.S. pays increased prices for oil and lacks the infrastructure for North American energy independence. This makes sense from an environmental perspective, but makes the country less flexible from an economic perspective. While pipelines promote the usage of more fossil fuels and are a detriment to the environment, the alternative is to use tens of thousands of trucks to transport petroleum and to import more foreign oil. Electric cars are not at the level of production that make it possible to simply go electric. While Tesla is ramping up new factories as fast as possible in Berlin and Texas, and at the same time expanding their existing factories in Shanghai and in California and Nevada, some of Tesla's models are still back-ordered for up to a year, if not longer. Even though electric car sales are growing quickly, they simply aren't there yet with just single-digit annual production numbers. Even if 100% of new vehicles produced were electric, it would still take 20 years, as Elon Musk has alluded to in the past, in order to switch the world's fleet to electric. And this actually goes back to an interview that Elon Musk did in 2014 in Norway, where he said that if he was able to stop all hydrocarbon production today, he would not do it.
And using a non-renewable resource obviously will not work. So we must find an alternative. But if there was a button I could press to stop all hydrocarbon usage today, I would not press it.
You would not press it?
Of course not.
You would not press it
because... It would cause
because...
human civilization to come to a halt.
And this is sort of what's happening in the world, where the sanctions on Russia could target up to 10% of the world's oil production. That's almost equivalent to pushing this button and partially halting civilization. Elon even tweeted yesterday that increased oil and gas production in the short term is critical, or people around the world will be placed under great duress. This is not a question of money, it is a question of having enough energy to power civilization. It would be interesting to get Elon Musk's perspective on building pipelines for fossil fuel needs today to help mitigate geopolitical risk, and then have future market forces dismantle them or repurpose them once electric cars are at high enough volumes and it no longer makes sense to require a pipeline. Now, Elon Musk follows up his comment on increasing oil and gas production immediately by saying that obviously this would negatively affect Tesla, but sustainable energy solutions simply cannot react instantaneously to make up for Russia oil and gas exports. It's interesting how, looking back at Tesla's history as a public company, they've been trashed by short sellers who tried to destroy the company. Even today, the president can barely acknowledge Tesla's existence because they aren't run by unions like General Motors and Ford. But Elon Musk and Tesla have single-handedly convinced the world to go electric and focus on sustainability, with Tesla doing the most to make this happen, being the largest EV maker in the world. And today, the country and even the world suddenly realizes that they need Tesla critically for national security purposes, but politics and unions and financial factors have gotten in the way of this. And now even Elon Musk, who has pushed against oil companies and legacy automotive, is making a decision that's best for the country to boost oil and gas production, and he says that would negatively affect Tesla. Now, if anything, this will not affect Tesla at all in the short term. If anything, Tesla currently has tons of demand, and even more people want to move away from oil as they see nosebleed prices at the pump. But longer term, this may be a negative for Tesla as it goes against the company's mission of accelerating the advent of sustainable energy. If production increases, it actually means cheaper and more affordable oil prices so that people won't have motivation to move to more sustainable modes of transport. Now, while this may be a negative, it's highly unlikely that it will slow down EV production in any way, which still has a long way to go in order to surpass ICE car production. However, even though Elon Musk is calling for increased oil and gas production to replace Russian exports and says this is a negative for Tesla, there are a number of reasons why this may be very much a positive for Tesla. Oil is a component in plastics and many other materials that go into electric vehicles. Increasing fossil fuel production, at least temporarily, could reduce raw material prices and thus reduce the costs of building EVs. Oil also affects manufacturing processes, some sources of heating, and the transportation of virtually anything currently. If there were electric cars and trucks moving everything around powered by solar panels, then this would be a different story. But the increase in oil affects the raw costs of everything that needs to be transported, including raw materials and commodities that make up all parts of the vehicles. We've recently seen competitor Rivian try to raise prices on their pre-ordered vehicles only to be met with an avalanche of cancellations. They had to undo their decision to raise prices, even though they likely have fine print that says they can change the price. But customers simply don't want to pay 20% more for their earlier reservations that they've held for years. Tesla has been surprisingly diligent at forecasting higher costs, something that Tesla's CFO Zach Kirkhorn discussed on the conference call, and they've slowly raised prices on new orders of their vehicles as demand has gone through the roof, but also while raw costs are on the rise. There is some risk for the Tesla Cybertruck, which has collected pre-orders, and there likely had to have been some increases in raw material costs since the Cybertruck was unveiled. However, Tesla has a few things that they can leverage. For instance, the pre-orders are for 1, 2, and 3 motor Cybertrucks. However, rumor has it that Tesla will be coming out with just a 4-motor and a 2-motor version. So they could change most of the offerings and potentially also build in new features to justify higher prices, since they've been quite secretive as to the capabilities of the Cybertruck. They will likely also start with the higher-end model, the 4-motor version, which is yet to be priced. And that can buy them some time for perhaps raw costs to come back down in the future, or for Tesla to gain efficiencies in production to maintain their dual-motor pricing. They've done something similar with the Model Y, where there's so much demand for the higher-end versions that the standard range Model Y has essentially been taken off the table for now in the US, likely until Tesla can catch up to the extreme demand that they're facing for electric vehicles. So what do you think the US should do to help mitigate inflation and replace the Russian oil exports? And let me know in the comments if you think increasing domestic oil production will affect Tesla in any way in the short or long term. Please hit the like button and subscribe, we would really appreciate that. And a huge shout out to all of our patrons that help to support our channel. Your support helps us to continue to make great content. Thank you guys so much for watching.